Miyamura, a guy just trying to vibe, but somehow always getting caught up in the chaos like you trying to watch an I'm in peace, but your mom keeps walking in at the worst possible moments. He's just living his life, dodging punches from his girlfriend, getting sniffed like a lost puppy, and getting way too much attention from guys who may or may not have a special folder dedicated to him. Thinking he's finally found some normalcy now, the universe has other plans. Every day, it's another round of misunderstandings, high school nonsense, and Hori threatening to rip his clothes off for reasons that are somehow never romantic. Another long intro. Smash that like button if you want to skip it. We'll cut out the intros once this video hits 1 likes. The story kicks off with a flashback of the Kyoto school trip. Yuka Yoshikawa is practically vibrating with excitement. She's never been to Kyoto before and it shows. Toru Ishikawa, acting like the responsible one for once, tells her to tone it down. Meanwhile, Izumi Miyamura and Kyuko Hori chat about how their middle school trip also took place in Kyoto. Then, Miyamura drops a problem that's been weighing on him, his tattoos. You can't risk anyone seeing them, and since the guys have to use the public bath, he's in trouble. His master plan is to survive the entire trip without showering and change his clothes in the bathroom like a fugitive. Hori casually mentions that the girls have private bathrooms in their rooms, rubbing salt in the wound. Later, Miyamura, Ishikawa, and Yura are assigned the same room. Yura grabs the hotel key like a champ, and then immediately passes out, leaving Miyamura and Ishikawa locked out. While trying to figure out their next move, Miyamura checks the itinerary and realizes they have to bathe before dinner. His entire plan crumbles before his eyes. Inside the changing room, Miyamura throws a silent SOS at Ishikawa, the only one aware of his tattoo situation. Thinking fast too fast, probably, Ishikawa blurts out that Miyamura isn't feeling well. Then, in the most disastrous pivot of all time, he immediately corrects himself and announces that Miyamura is on his period. Miyamura drags himself down the hallway, barely processing the disaster that just unfolded. Before he can reach his room, he runs into Hori. After hearing his predicament, she casually suggests he use her room's private bathroom since Yuki isn't around. That offer sounds way too easy. Miyamura points out that she shouldn't just let any guy into her room like that. When he asks why she's letting him in, she barely thinks before answering. She trusts him. She knows he wouldn't do anything. Miyamura doesn't drop it. He leans in with another. Are you sure, just to see if she really means it? That confidence cracks fast. Hori flusters, suddenly questioning what he's even implying. After Miyamura leaves, she tries to shake off the conversation. If she had let him do something, he still wouldn't. She was sure of that before. Now, after that exchange, she's not so sure anymore. The next day, the group explores Kyoto. Yura and Ishikawa treat it like a theme park, being loud enough to make heads turn. Yuki plays the exhausted chaperone, scolding them the entire time. While checking the itinerary, Miyamura spots something he somehow missed before, and the guys do have a late-night bath slot at 11 p.m. Yesterday's panic was completely unnecessary. After the trip ends, Yuki proudly shows Hori all the pictures they took, completely unaware of the unnecessary crisis Miyamura went through. Miyamura ends up completely drenched after Remi Ayasaki accidentally sprays him with a hose. With his clothes sticking uncomfortably to his skin, he follows Ayasaki to the clinic, where she hands him a towel. As he dries off, she starts eyeing him suspiciously. Something isn't adding up. She casually brings up how he always avoids swimming and how he refused to bathe in the public bath during the Kyoto trip. The dots are connecting fast, and Miyamura can feel the walls closing in. Later on the school rooftop, Miyamura vents to Ishikawa about the situation. Ishikawa, ever the problem solver, suggests wearing a vest if he ever has to be in the water. Miyamura immediately shuts that down. His arms would still be exposed. Ishikawa doesn't let it slide that easily. He reminds Miyamura of the time he came over to borrow a textbook, only to walk in on him wearing Hori's old sailor-style school uniform. Miyamura has no comeback for that one. Right on cue, Kakeru Sengoku walks in and immediately gets dragged into a completely unrelated debate. What clothes do girls look better in? This is his life now. Miyamura and Sengoku talk to their English teacher, Shin Yasuda. Both of them are hit with the worst news imaginable. They have to swim on the last day of peace. Sengoku is horrified at the thought of exposing his scrawny frame, while Miyamura is more concerned about keeping his tattoos hidden. Desperate, they scramble for excuses, but Yasuda isn't buying any of it. In the end, a compromise is reached. While the rest of the boys swim, Miyamura and Sengoku get assigned a different task, cleaning around the pool. It's not ideal, but anything is better than getting in the water. Kyuko Hori stands by the window inside the student council room, watching the school grounds while the rest of the friend group hangs around. The atmosphere is calm for about 5 seconds. Then Yura bursts into the room, waving the team assignment papers for sports day like they're the results of a major election. Miyamura and Sengoku barely glance up. They already know where this is going, and they want no part of it. Sports day means running, sweating, and worst of all, public participation. They assume this is just another version of the swimming fiasco, so they take matters into their own hands. Their solution is a full-on rain dance. If nature cooperates, maybe they won't have to suffer. Meanwhile, the school is trying to keep things organized. To balance out the number of boys and girls on each team, students are divided by gender and randomly assigned either the East or West team. That means they'll end up competing against their own classmates. Sengoku barely hides his disinterest and openly admits that if Yuki and Yura weren't on his team, he would have skipped the whole thing. On the girls' side, another issue pops up: the cheer routine. It's mandatory, and Sakura Kano already looks like she wants to disappear. She remembers last year's disaster all too well and refuses to repeat it. With zero confidence in her rhythm and a very real fear of embarrassing herself, she's ready to fight for an escape plan. Miyamura and Hori walk home from school, casually chatting until the topic shifts to sports day. Miyamura doesn't have the best memories. Growing up, he spent most of these events dealing with bullying, so the thought of participating again doesn't exactly excite him. Hori, however, isn't having it. She insists he should join the 100-meter race, convinced that he's actually a good runner. Miyamura isn't sure what to make of that. No one has ever told him something like this before, let alone encouraged him to compete. The idea lingers in his mind, and before he realizes it, he actually starts looking forward to sports day. Meanwhile, on the school grounds, Sakura Kano sits against the wall of the building, lost in her own anxieties. She's been assigned to the West team, and after another round of cheer practice, her confidence is at an all-time low. The thought of embarrassing herself again makes her want to disappear. Yuki, despite being on the East team, notices her distress and steps in to help. She starts guiding Sakura through the routine, breaking it down into simpler steps. Inside the school, Sengoku watches the scene unfold. It doesn't make much sense, two people from opposing teams helping each other. But as he keeps watching, he sees how much fun they're having. He can't help but smile. Cooking class turns into a disaster before it even begins. Sengoku, Remy, and Sakura get grouped together. But there's one small problem: only Sakura knows how to cook. That means she's stuck babysitting two culinary disasters while everyone else actually gets things done. She spends the entire period lecturing them while their group falls further behind, watching in frustration as the rest of the class finishes with no issues. Then Sengoku makes things worse. He fumbles a knife while cutting potatoes and ends up slicing his finger. Sakura, already exhausted, drags him to the clinic to get a bandage. That leaves Remy alone with strict instructions to only mix the ingredients in her bowl. Predictably, she ignores that. Instead of following the recipe, she starts adding random ingredients like she's in a mad scientist experiment. The result is a thick purple smoke that burns everyone's eyes the second it rises from the bowl. Windows fly open, students scatter, and whatever Remy just created probably broke a few health codes. By the end of class, somehow enough curry is salvaged for the three of them to eat, but there's still one last failure waiting. Sakura lifts the lid on the rice Remy cooked and immediately regrets it. The texture is all wrong. The water ratio is a disaster. What should have been fluffy rice now looks like a tragic attempt at soupy rice gruel. Yuki takes charge of handing out sports day shirts, moving through the classroom like an efficient manager. After Miyamura and Toro get theirs, the conversation naturally shifts to Miyamura's unexpected participation in the 100-meter race. Toru, always the instigator, pushes him to go a step further and join the relay race too. Miyamura isn't so sure. The track team is competing, and he remembers last year's disaster all too well. Yura got completely obliterated in the relay. If that's the competition, he's not exactly eager to sign up for public humiliation. Then his attention shifts to something else entirely. Hori steps into view in her cheer outfit, and whatever Miyamura expected, this wasn't it. Instead of the classic cheer uniform he had pictured, she's wearing a black jacket that looks straight out of a boy's middle school uniform, complete with white gloves, a green armband, a head sash, and a white tatsuki tied across her chest. The whole thing radiates intensity rather than school spirit. Hori, oblivious to his confusion, asks what he thinks. Miyamura stares for a second before settling on the only honest response. It's complicated. During English class, Hori glances across the room and immediately notices something off. Miyamura is sitting way too close to another girl. Something about it doesn't sit right. Hori's mood takes a sharp dive, and it doesn't go unnoticed. The second she spots Miyamura sitting way too close to another girl, something shifts. Jealousy kicks in, and Toro picks up on it immediately. Before she can do anything about it, their English teacher, Shin Yasuda, calls on her to read a few lines from the textbook. Perfect timing. Instead of following the actual text, Hori takes the opportunity to not so subtly air her frustrations, delivering every word with a menacing aura that completely changes the mood of the classroom. Later, at Hori's house, Miyamura clears things up. The girl he was talking to forgot her textbook, and he was just helping her out. That's it. No hidden meaning, no secret betrayal. Hori hears him, and she's not about to admit that she was just jealous for no reason. Still, it bothers her. She vents to Yuki, who doesn't even try to sugarcoat it. Hori is terrifying when she's jealous. That comment doesn't help. Yuki then asks if Miyamura ever gets jealous, but Hori doesn't have an answer for that. She's never really thought about it. Sensing the incoming overthinking spiral, Yuki casually tells her to don't mind. Meanwhile, across the walkway, Toru and Miyamura pass by carrying boxes. They stop to greet Yuki and Hori before explaining that they just called a meeting for the sports day committee over the intercom. Yuki, completely unaware, looks confused. Turns out, she missed the whole thing because she was outside painting class signs. Hori, trying to be helpful, offers to pitch in. Yuki isn't so sure. There's a reason Hori's lowest grade is in art, and she's very skeptical. Before she can say anything, Tenki Mizuchi, another classmate, notices. Hori sneezes, barely reacting to the cold as she continues painting outside. Tenki Mizuchi, passing by, notices and does the logical thing. He takes off his blazer and places it on her lap to keep her warm before heading off. No big deal. Then Miyamura walks in. His eyes immediately lock onto the blazer that does not belong to him sitting on Hori's lap. His mood shifts in an instant. Without a word, he removes Mizuchi's blazer and replaces it with his own cardigan, making it very clear whose warmth she should be using. But he doesn't stop there. In a move that shocks Hori into silence, he puts on Mizuchi's blazer himself. Then disaster strikes. Mizuchi returns. Miyamura doesn't even think. He snatches his cardigan back, rips off Mizuchi's blazer, puts it right back on Hori's lap, and dives for cover before Mizuchi can notice anything suspicious. Hori, forced to play along, casually hands Mizuchi his blazer back. He takes it without a second thought and walks away. Once the coast is clear, Miyamura emerges from his hiding spot, looking way too proud of himself. He explains his brilliant reasoning. He wore Mizuchi's blazer so that Mizuchi wouldn't be able to tell the difference between Hori's body heat and his own. Hori stares at him, the realization sinking in. So Miyamura does get jealous. The girls' hurdle race kicks off with Hori representing Team East and Remi competing for Team West. The moment Miyamura and Ishikawa start cheering, Remi sees an opportunity she can't pass up. With a sly smile, she casually mentions to Hori that Miyamura is cheering for her. Hori brushes it off, trying to stay focused. Miyamura is on Team West, which means he's obviously cheering for his own team. Nothing personal. But Remi isn't done. She drops a final bomb right before the race. She wants to win to impress Miyamura and win him over. That one lands hard. The race begins and Remi pulls ahead with a strong start. Hori, on the other hand, stumbles, still thrown off by what she just heard. It takes a few seconds for her brain to catch up. Then the frustration kicks in. Fueled by pure irritation, she surges forward, no longer running the race, charging through it. A hurdle gets in her way. She smashes through it without a second thought. But in the end, Remi takes first place. Hori crosses the finish line, not happy about it. Miyamura watches her from the stands, expecting her usual frustration, but something about the way she keeps running despite the loss hits differently. Before he even thinks about it, he gets up and starts cheering for her, completely ignoring the fact that she's on the opposite team. For everyone watching, it's a weird move. For Miyamura, it's instinct. Hori, fueled by Miyamura's support, pushes herself harder than ever, forcing her legs to keep moving until she finally crosses the finish line. She's exhausted, frustrated, but oddly satisfied. Remi, still catching her breath from the race, casually admits that she couldn't actually steal Miyamura from Hori even if she wanted to. Turns out, her earlier comment was just a joke. She laughs, adding that she's only interested in Sengoku anyway. Right then, Miyamura walks over, checking on Hori while she and Remi talk. Hori, still processing everything, wastes no time blaming both her good and bad performance on him. Somehow, just knowing he was watching threw her off and pushed her forward. Before he can respond, she shyly mutters a quiet thank you for cheering her on. Before she can get too caught up in her emotions, Sawada catches her attention from a distance, wildly waving. Turns out the next event is a tug-of-war match and Sawada is up next. Hori watches as Sawada gives it her all, and still loses. Meanwhile, Sakura and Remi get ready to cheer for the next event, while Hori screams for her team with such intensity that Shu looks genuinely concerned for his safety. Over on the West team, Miyamura notices Sakura's hesitation. While the rest of the team hypes up Ishikawa, she looks lost in the crowd. Without hesitation, Miyamura steps up, rallying the whole team to cheer together. Shu grumbles about how all the girls seem to be cheering for Ishikawa, but Ishikawa barely notices. He's too busy realizing just how much Miyamura has changed. The guy who used to keep to himself is now leading team morale like it's second nature. Then Shu shocks everyone by actually winning the event. Up next is the girls' cheering competition. Hori steps onto the field in a masculine outfit, leading the cheers with an intensity that catches everyone off guard. The male students slump in disappointment, expecting something entirely different. The younger female students, on the other hand, are completely captivated. Shu and Sengoku turn their heads toward Miyamura, waiting for some kind of reaction. He doesn't move. He doesn't blink. He just sits there, staring at Hori like his entire understanding of reality has been shaken. Meanwhile, the West team radiates pure feminine energy. Remi takes the spotlight, her cute and bubbly performance instantly winning over the male students. Once the event wraps up, Sakura approaches Yuki, quietly thanking her for the help during practice despite being on the opposing team. Then comes the scavenger hunt race. Miyamura gets thrown in as a last-minute replacement, thinking it will be just another simple event. It isn't. Hori steps up as his opponent, and when they grab their cue cards, both end up with the same task: bring Sengoku. Neither hesitates. They reach for him at the same time, each pulling an arm in opposite directions. Sengoku, caught between them, looks less like a teammate and more like an unfortunate prize being fought over. The final event brings absolute chaos. The cavalry battle begins with 3 students acting as the horse while one rides on top. Sengoku leads the East team while Miyamura takes charge of the West. The match escalates fast, both sides clashing with everything they have. Miyamura's team pulls off a calculated move at the last second, securing the victory. The scoreboard changes, the crowd cheers, and the event moves on. For everyone else, it's just another game. For Hori, watching Miyamura take the win stirs something unspoken inside her. The scoreboard flashes the final results, declaring the East team, Hori's team, the overall winners of Sports Day. Cheers erupt across the field as students celebrate their victory, the energy electric. Miyamura steps out of the restroom, still adjusting to the sunburn stinging his nose. His eyes land on Hori and everything else immediately fades into the background. She's no longer in her usual uniform. Instead, she's wearing a full cheerleading outfit. The sudden transformation hits like a truck. Hori, clearly enjoying the moment, throws out a question. She wants to know if she looks cute. Miyamura doesn't hesitate. His response comes out instantly: super cute. No sarcasm, no hesitation, just pure, unfiltered sincerity. The words land harder than expected. Hori's face turns red immediately. She bolts without another word. Tossing out a beka on her way out like that somehow cancels out the entire exchange. But as much as she tries to act like it didn't matter, she holds onto that compliment tighter than she'd ever admit. With exams creeping closer, Miyamura heads over to Hori's house for what is supposed to be a productive study session. Books open, pens in hand, everything starts off surprisingly well. That is, until Kyosuke strolls in. Seeing them actually focus for once, he decides that's unacceptable and plops himself into the kotatsu. Sawada is already there, making an already cramped space even tighter. One thing leads to another, and soon enough, the study session turns into a group nap. The peace doesn't last forever. Miyamura wakes up to an immediate crisis. His legs are completely tangled with everyone else's. Moving is not an option. That wouldn't be a problem if he could stay put. Unfortunately, nature calls. He tries shifting little by little, but the sharp pins and needles sensation shoots up his legs like punishment for daring to move. The struggle is real, and he needs help. The only ones who could assist are Kyosuke and Hori, but neither seems interested in making any effort. What follows is a brief but very dramatic exchange between Miyamura and Hori, while Kyosuke remains completely useless, snoring away. After what feels like an eternity, Miyamura finally manages to free himself and rushes to the bathroom like his life depends on it. Later, Kakeru drops by and somehow, against all odds, the 3 of them actually manage to study. The streak of productivity doesn't last forever. At some point, Miyamura dozes off. That's when Hori notices something: 3 unread messages on his phone, all from Shindu. The latest one looks normal enough, asking Miyamura to meet him at the park. The next is slightly concerning. The final message is straight up alarming. Shindo, in all caps, professing his love. Hori's expression darkens instantly. When Miyamura finally wakes up, he immediately senses something is wrong. Before he can figure it out, the misunderstanding clears up. Shindu meant to send those messages to Chika. Crisis averted, but Hori is still annoyed. Miyamura, unaware of just how much emotional whiplash she just went through, somehow ends up kissing her instead of arguing. Later, the couple heads out to grab something from a nearby grocery store, carrying on as if that entire roller coaster of a misunderstanding never happened. Hori and Miyamura return to her house, expecting a quiet evening. Instead, they walk in to find Takeru Sengoku sitting in the kotatsu alongside Kyosuke and Soda. Turns out, Kakeru and Takeru ran into Kyosuke earlier that evening, and in true Kyosuke fashion, he decided to drag them both back home with him. Takeru quickly picks up on how casually Miyamura visits the Hori house. When he questions it, Miyamura shrugs it off, mentioning that he spends a lot of time there. Kyosuke, never one to miss a moment, takes the chance to clarify why his daughter and Miyamura are dating. Takeru's disapproval is immediate. He argues that Kakeru has no time for dating, believing relationships at their age are unnecessary distractions. This revelation blindsides Miyamura and Hori, who immediately realize something. Kakeru still hasn't told his father about Remy. Kakeru, looking cornered, explains that he's just been waiting for the right moment. He even planned to introduce Remy during Christmas, but they ended up at her place instead. That means Takeru still has no idea his son has been in a relationship this whole time. Miyamura and Hori see this for what it is, prime teasing material. Before they can fully enjoy it, Kyosuke speaks up. He clearly isn't a fan of Takeru's strict approach. According to him, expecting teenagers to avoid relationships entirely is unreasonable. He even pushes the idea that Takeru's own son must have someone he's interested in, challenging his rigid worldview. The comment hits a nerve. Takeru, clearly irritated, fires back. What follows is a brief but heated back and forth between the two fathers, neither willing to back down. Hori, trying to redirect the conversation, attempts to steer things back to Kekeru's girlfriend. Unfortunately, nobody listens. On the way home, Taika returns to his son and bluntly tells him he doesn't need a girlfriend. Kakeru, already knowing how this conversation will go, chooses to say nothing. At this point, his father is definitely not ready to learn about Remy. Yura sits on the couch, flipping through TV channels while Motoko quietly reads beside him. Everything seems normal until Yura casually mentions that a guy named Kidahara called for her yesterday. The reaction is instant. Motoko stiffens, her face turning red. She demands to know why he didn't hand her the phone. Yura, completely unfazed, replies that he simply hung up. That's all it takes. Chaos erupts. The siblings launch into a full-blown, over-the-top argument. Yura, sensing her unusual level of agitation, throws out the question, does she like this guy? Motoko refuses to give a straight answer. He follows up with a warning, declaring that Kidahara better not be a womanizer. Motoko fires back, saying he already has someone he likes. Later, after finishing an exam, Yura walks out with Miyamura, Hori, Yuki, and Toru. Toru, in a good mood, suggests grabbing some food together. Yura, always up for a hangout, happily agrees. The plan lasts all of 2 minutes before he suddenly cancels. His reason is an email from Motoko telling him a friend is coming over, which means he should stay out late. That message changes everything. Yura rushes home like it's a national emergency. The second he arrives, another sibling battle breaks out. He demands to know what's going on. When he learns that Kidahara is coming over, he takes things up a notch, dramatically yelling for his grandfather to hand him his replica sword. The shouting match gets so loud that neither of them notices Kidahara standing at the door. When the study session finally begins, Yura does everything in his power to establish dominance, trying to intimidate the guy. His plan backfires spectacularly. Instead of being scared, Kidahara starts idolizing him. Motoko's worst fear slowly becomes reality. After that day, Kidahara barely talks to her. Every conversation seems to revolve around Yura, like she's just an extension of him. The whole situation turns into prime comedy material for Yura and his friends. He dramatically tells them that the guy his sister likes has a crush on him instead. They tell him to go date a girl already. Yura, completely serious, declares that he only likes girls in Sengoku. The nonsense continues the next morning. Yura, Yuki, Toru, and Miyamura all end up sprinting to school, bread stuffed in their mouths like they're living in a cliché anime opening. Yura and the others reach school fully expecting to be late. Instead, Sengoku greets them with news that completely derails their morning rush. Third-year students only have afternoon classes. They sprinted all the way for nothing. Before Yura can even recover from the pointless exercise, his next crisis arrives. He turns a corner and comes face to face with Kidahara, the very person he's been desperately trying to avoid. Panic mode activates. Thinking fast, and by fast meaning terribly, he goes full authority figure. Raising his voice, he orders Kidahara to stop roaming around and get moving. Before he can even process what he just did, Mr. Yasuda appears out of nowhere and smacks him, completely convinced that Miura is bullying the poor kid. Hori and Rimi, watching the chaos unfold, decide to investigate. They casually ask Kidahara if he knows Yura. Instead of answering normally, Kidahara asks if Yura has a girlfriend. Both girls immediately start giggling. Yura, still trying to salvage what's left of his dignity, attempts to send Kidahara away. The girls, ignoring his struggle, invite the boy to join them at the school store. Just when things start spiraling even further, Yasuda unknowingly saves Yura by guiding Kidahara to the classroom he was actually looking for. Later that day, the entire friend group gathers for a meeting. That's when the realization hits. Kidahara is the boy Yura had been talking about all along. Meanwhile, Remy and Sengoku try to process the absolute nonsense that just unfolded. Neither of them fully understand the situation, but at this point, they've learned to stop questioning Yura's life choices. Miyamura, Shu, and Ishikawa spend the night at Sengoku's house, something his father never expected. He always assumed his son had no friends living nearby, yet here they are taking over the space like it's their second home. When it's finally time to sleep, a new problem arises. The room is too small for 4 people. Miyamura knocks out instantly, unbothered by the chaos. Sengoku, on the other hand, lies awake, unable to find a decent spot. That's when it hits him. He has never seen Miyamura without a shirt. The realization lingers. Miyamura always goes out of his way to stay covered, never showing his skin to anyone. Suspicion takes over. Sengoku decides to confirm his theory, reaching forward to pull at Miyamura's shirt. Before he gets anywhere, Shu walks in. The timing is catastrophic. Sengoku, caught in an unfortunate position, freezes as Shu stares at him. The air shifts. The teasing starts immediately. The room erupts into a wave of jokes, turning a simple curiosity into something far worse. Ishikawa, the only one attempting logic, suggests moving the table to the side. The problem is solved in seconds. Sengoku, exhausted from his own poor decisions, finally gets a place to sleep. A few days later, Sengoku and Remy walk home together. The air is crisp, the cold biting. Remy's hands freeze as she presses them against Sengoku's cheeks without hesitation. The gesture lingers longer than expected. Their hands find each other, staying linked until they reach her house. Before parting, they hug. Remy leans in, ready for more, but Sengoku steps back. The idea of doing this in public doesn't sit right with him. The next day, Remy and Kano study at the library until closing time. Kano packs up first, ready to leave, but Remy takes her time. Outside, Kano spots Sengoku. Without hesitation, she asks him to walk home with her, and he agrees. Moments later, Remy steps out, expecting to see her boyfriend waiting. The space is empty. Walking down the hallway, she notices Hori approaching. Without wasting a second, she stops her, demanding to know where Sengoku went. Hori catches sight of Sengoku and Kano leaving together. Something about the situation feels off, and letting Remy know the truth doesn't seem like the right move. Without thinking, she yells, pointing at the window, claiming to have spotted a massive bug. The distraction works. Remy immediately shifts her attention, completely forgetting what she was asking about. Meanwhile, Sengoku and Kano arrive at a cafe, taking a seat across from each other. Kano, holding a small gift box, looks suspiciously prepared for something. The fact that Remy isn't there makes it even more questionable. Ishikawa, passing by, spots them. His eyes widen as he quickly drags Shu into the situation. Shu, hearing the news, goes through an immediate emotional crisis. At first, fury takes over. Then something clicks. If Sengoku is with Kano, that means he might actually have a chance with Remy. The two are not exactly subtle. Their conversation gets so loud that Sengoku hears every single word. Without hesitation, he walks over and confronts them. He makes one thing very clear. Neither of them is allowed to tell Remy what they just saw. Shu, still feeling confident, jokes about what might happen if he does tell. Sengoku's expression darkens. His stare turns sharp, and without raising his voice, he repeats himself with a weight that shuts Shu down instantly. A chill runs down his spine. He nods. This is not a fight he wants to pick. Shortly after, Kamino leaves the cafe carrying a bag. The mystery starts unraveling. It turns out she had made a bet with Remy before the exam. If Remy managed to score more than 60 in math, Kamino would buy cookies from her favorite store. The challenge was no joke. Remy had never scored higher than 40 before, making this an uphill battle from the start. When the results come out, she gets 58, just 2 points away. Close enough to sting, but not enough to win the bet. Sengoku, knowing how hard she worked, takes matters into his own hands. He buys the cookies himself and hands them over to Kano to give to Remy. The truth finally sets in. Sengoku wasn't cheating on Remy. He was just looking after her in his own way. Sakura moves through her school days feeling like nothing stands out. High school life drags on, offering little excitement. The only thing keeping her going is Weekly Shinobi. She has been following the story for so long that the release days feel like the only thing worth looking forward to. As soon as school ends, she heads straight to the store, expecting to pick up the latest issue. The shelves are empty. Every copy is gone. Disappointment settles in, but she isn't the only one there. Yanagi stands nearby, holding a fresh copy in his hands. Without hesitation, he hands it over, letting her borrow it before he even reads it himself. The gesture catches her off guard. They end up talking, drawn together by their shared obsession with the series. At school, people take notice. Yanagi and Sakura seem nothing alike, but that doesn't stop them from connecting. Whispers spread, but Yanagi doesn't care. He keeps things simple. Later, he takes her to buy frames, a small act that lingers in her mind. On another day, Miyamura walks across campus and spots Sawada picking up her scarf. 2 students from her class stand nearby, watching with grins that feel off. Something isn't right. It doesn't take long to confirm it. Sawada is being bullied. Miyamura steps in, offering her the words she needs to hear. He makes one thing clear: she isn't alone. She doesn't have to face it by herself. Remy and Yuki, both third years, take her in without hesitation. They see her for who she is and accept her completely, flaws and all. One day, Sawada overhears a conversation in her class. The club recruitment drive isn't going well, and members scramble for a solution. 2 art club students reach out to their friend Shimoda, asking if he knows of any open bulletin boards. Shimoda suggests the board near the main entrance. It has plenty of space. The response is immediate. That board isn't an auction. It belongs to the third years. Sawada stands in front of the bulletin board, carefully fixing the art club's poster. The spot is tucked away in a secluded area of the school, barely noticeable. Despite that, she adjusts it with quiet determination. Yanagi and Remy pass by and catch sight of her. They watch for a moment before pointing out the obvious. No one will see the poster if it stays in the same place. It won't help the art club if no one even knows it's there. Yanagi doesn't wait for a response. He steps forward, helps Sawada remove the poster, and leads her toward the main entrance. The bulletin board there is in a prime location, impossible to miss. If the art club wants new recruits, this is where the poster needs to go. Sawada hesitates. The board belongs to the third-year students. Everyone knows that. Except it turns out that isn't true. There's no rule against using it. The idea that only third years can post there is just a rumor. The following day, 2 students from Sawada's class approach her. This time, they aren't mocking her or giving her a hard time. Shimoda has seen her working with third years to move the poster, and word has spread. They thank her. A first-year student has already visited the art club because of her efforts. It's too soon to say if anything will change completely, but something is shifting. Sawada, the girl who has always been on the outside, is slowly becoming more accepted. If things continue like this, she might even find friends. Yanagi drops his contact lens in the hallway. Ishikawa, without hesitation, crouches down and starts searching for it. Just as he does, Sengoku walks by, takes one look, and immediately jumps to the worst possible conclusion. From his perspective, Yanagi stands tall while Ishikawa kneels on the floor, making the entire situation look far more suspicious than it actually is. Meanwhile, Hori and Miyamura discuss Yanagi's absence from the morning class. Hori assumes he struggles to wake up on time, a theory that makes perfect sense. Miyamura, unbothered, casually calls Yanagi by his first name. The words land differently for Hori. The realization sinks in. If Miyamura can do it so easily, then maybe she should ask for permission too. Later, Miyamura overhears students talking about Yanagi's bus running late. The temperature outside is brutal and waiting alone in the cold sounds miserable. Without hesitation, Miyamura and the others show up at the bus stop, bringing hot chocolate and cookies to keep him company. The next day, the teacher reminds the class to take their elective courses seriously and warns against skipping. Yanagi immediately starts to feel the pressure. Waking up early has never been his strong suit. His friends, knowing this, start calling him in the mornings to make sure he gets to school on time. The system works until Yanagi decides to handle it himself. He relies on his alarm. His alarm fails. He shows up late. One afternoon, Sengoku stands in front of the vending machine, focused on making his selection. Yanagi walks up beside him and casually says his name. Sengoku, caught completely off guard, flinches and accidentally presses a random button. A can of juice drops into the slot. It is not what he wanted. Yanagi notices immediately and offers to drink it instead, but Sengoku refuses. Instead of arguing, Yanagi buys him another drink, this time making sure it's the one he originally wanted. Sengoku, realizing there's no way out, finally accepts. As Yanagi takes a sip of the accidental juice, he notes its unusual taste. Most students avoid it. Sengoku watches for a brief moment, silently acknowledging the effort. Without another word, Yanagi drinks it anyway, as if the mistake never mattered at all. Sengoku listens carefully, taking in the shift in Yanagi's tone. Something about it feels different, more casual than usual. It doesn't seem forced, but he doesn't want Yanagi to feel pressured to act a certain way. Instead of overthinking it, he tells Yanagi to speak however he wants, without worrying about formality. Later that day, Ishikawa spots Sengoku and immediately turns to Shu. Without hesitation, he claims Sengoku is acting so unnaturally that it's grossing him out. Shu, always ready to escalate things, tries to tease him. His reward is a slap. Ishikawa quickly draws his own conclusion. Sengoku must have made up with Yanagi. The shift in his behavior is too obvious. Moments later, Yanagi joins them, completely unaware of the conversation that just took place. Shu, never one to back down from ridiculous claims, announces that he can catch a katana mid-swing. No hesitation, no doubt. To put it to the test, Yanagi immediately raises his hand and swings it towards Shu's head. Shu, determined to prove his point, tries to catch it in time. The attempt ends exactly as expected, horribly. Sengoku watches the chaos unfold from a distance, silently wondering if Yanagi would have done the same if he had been in Shu's place. The thought lingers. He turns to Ishikawa, casually stating that Yanagi tends to attract outgoing, energetic people. Ishikawa, already seeing where this is going, picks up on what Sengoku actually means. He wants to be friendlier with Yanagi but doesn't know how. Instead of giving him a straightforward answer, Ishikawa decides to demonstrate. He suggests that Sengoku should act more like Shu. Then, without warning, he lunges at Yanagi and starts tickling him. Sengoku immediately shuts down the idea. The thought of doing something like that makes him physically uncomfortable. Ishikawa refuses to let it go. If Sengoku is going to be awkward about it, then he needs practice. What follows is an impromptu rehearsal, where Ishikawa forces Sengoku to try it out on him instead. Miyamura walks in at the absolute worst time. He stops, watching as Sengoku and Ishikawa tickle each other with way too much intensity. Curiosity takes over. He has no idea what they're up to, but he definitely wants to know. Ishikawa, barely holding back laughter, explains the ridiculous reason behind their strange behavior. He lays it out simply. Sengoku just wants to be more friendly with someone but has no idea how. The explanation only makes the situation funnier. Before Miyamura can fully process what he just heard, Shu and Yanagi walk over. Shu, always jumping to conclusions, immediately senses that something is off. He wonders if someone is getting bullied. Miyamura, never missing a chance to stir things up, casually claims that Sengoku is kicking him out. The words barely leave his mouth before Shu reaches his verdict: Sengoku is the bully. Sengoku, too blindsided to even defend himself, stands frozen. Before the misunderstanding escalates further, Yanagi speaks up. Without hesitation, he shuts down the accusation. Sengoku would never do something like that. The words land heavier than expected. Sengoku and Yanagi, once constantly at odds, now find themselves in a place of mutual understanding. The shift is subtle, but undeniable. The tension that once defined their interactions has faded, replaced by something more natural. Things are changing. Whether they realize it or not, they are starting to respect each other. Shin Yasuda, the school's most eccentric yet strangely lovable English teacher, starts his day like any other. But what should be a normal routine quickly unravels into a series of unfortunate events, turning him into an unintentional spectacle. It begins in the teacher's room, where Yasuda wakes up from an unplanned nap. While he sleeps, mischievous students take full advantage of the opportunity, carefully styling his hair into pigtails. Completely unaware of his new look, he stretches, adjusts his glasses, and prepares to face the day as if nothing has changed. A fellow teacher notices immediately and tries to warn him. The attempt fails. Yasuda, oblivious as ever, dismisses the concern and carries on with his routine. Stepping into Hori's classroom, he instantly becomes the center of attention. Students glance at each other, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Some try to hold back laughter. Others attempt increasingly desperate ways to get his attention and make him realize what's wrong. Every effort fails. Yasuda remains entirely unaware, brushing off the odd behavior around him. Even Miyamura, someone used to dealing with absurd situations, tries and fails to get the message across. The inevitable happens when Yuki walks in. One glance at Yasuda sends her into uncontrollable laughter. Her reaction spreads like wildfire, and in seconds the entire class erupts. Confusion turns to realization. Yasuda finally reaches up, touches his hair, and freezes. His face flushes, not from becoming the class's latest joke, but from the sheer embarrassment of knowing that students managed to style his hair while he remained completely unaware. Yasuda's day of humiliation continues. In desperate need of a key, he approaches Nakame, the ever-forgetful physics teacher. What should be a quick exchange turns into an absurd struggle as Nakame fumbles through his collection, forgetting which key belongs to what. Each attempt to locate the right one only adds to Yasuda's growing frustration. Before the situation can get any worse, disaster strikes. Unaware of a hole in his pocket, Nakame accidentally drops every single key. They scatter across the floor, unnoticed by him but not by Yuki, who picks them up and steps in to help. She offers to fix his pocket, revealing that she always carries a sewing kit for emergencies. The habit comes from dealing with Ishikawa, who has an uncanny ability to lose buttons at an alarming rate. Meanwhile, Ishikawa watches from a distance, standing next to Yasuda. His thoughts spiral immediately. A casual conversation between Yuki and Nakame looks suspicious, too comfortable, too familiar. His mind jumps to conclusions. But Yasuda, ever the disaster magnet, takes it even further. His own jealousy flares as he completely misreads the situation. Panic takes over. Before he can stop himself, he reacts loudly, clumsily, and in the worst possible way. In one swift moment, both he and Ishikawa blow their own cover, turning their quiet surveillance into a public embarrassment. Yasuda's day of confusion and embarrassment refuses to slow down. While making his rounds, he stumbles upon Yura, Miyamura, and Ishikawa. His instincts kick in immediately. Something about their secretive huddle raises suspicion. Expecting to catch them in some immoral act, he charges forward, ready to expose whatever mischief they're up to. The reality is far less dramatic. Instead of anything scandalous, he finds them holding a simple cake. The realization throws him off completely. Before he can recover, the students seize the opportunity. The situation flips on him in an instant as they start playfully interrogating him instead. What starts as a joke quickly spirals into an unbearably awkward exchange. The teasing escalates, the conversation takes a turn, and before long, Yasuda is left standing there, completely flustered as the students openly question his intentions instead. Elsewhere, Sengoku and Hori find themselves trapped in the student council room. A harmless nap turns into an unfortunate predicament as they wake up to a locked door, completely alone. Yasuda, still riding the wave of his disastrous day, ends up being their reluctant savior. He rescues them, but not without turning the situation into something far more complicated. His immediate assumption is the worst possible one. Instead of simply unlocking the door, he insists on a full inspection to ensure their innocence. The scolding that follows only adds to the ridiculousness of it all. Before things spiral even further, Terajima-sensei steps in. With a single remark, he redirects Yasuda's misplaced energy and lets the students go free. The next day, Hori recounts the entire ordeal to Miyamura. The second he hears it, his concern shifts entirely to Sengoku. The idea of Sengoku being locked in a room with Hori sits in his mind longer than it should. Then something unexpected happens. Yasuda reappears, seemingly changed. Terajima-sensei's lecture seems to have worked. For a brief moment, he carries himself differently, acting more composed. The illusion doesn't last. The following day, true to his nature, he snaps right back to his usual antics, making the entire transformation nothing more than an unintentional joke. Horin brings up a horror movie that Miyamura supposedly liked and watched in the theater. The only problem is that it never actually happened. Before Miyamura can even process the conversation, Wada casually pulls out his phone and snaps a picture of him. He doesn't even try to be subtle. He openly announces his reasoning to Ishikawa, claiming it's to memorialize Miyamura. Later, while passing by, Miyamura notices Wada reading a mystery novel and strikes up a conversation. The moment he shows interest, Wada lights up, practically glowing. Without hesitation, he hands the book over. excitedly mentioning that it has horror elements. Miyamura, knowing what's coming, casually drops the fact that horror is Hori's favorite genre. Watabe's excitement dies instantly. Realizing his mistake, Miyamura quickly covers for it, adding that he likes horror too. The mood shifts again. Wada returns to his previous state of overflowing enthusiasm, completely unaware of the emotional whiplash he just experienced. When Miyamura reaches the Hori household, he barely steps inside before Sawada and Kyusuke surround him. The situation is weird, but nothing could have prepared him for what happens next. Hori walks up to him. Without warning, she starts sniffing him. Her conclusion comes fast. He smells like Watabe, not Shindo, not Ishikawa. Watabe. It turns out that Hori has cataloged how everyone in her life smells, just in case something like this ever happened. Miyamura, instead of pointing out how completely bizarre this is, takes a different approach. He asks how he's supposed to know who she's been hanging out with since he can't recognize scents the way she does. Hori, ever the problem solver, commits to sharing that knowledge with him. She even goes a step further, promising to come clean if she ever cheats on him. The next day, Miyamura casually sniffs Yura, Ishikawa, and Sengoku before walking away without a single word. The three stand there stunned before coming to the only logical conclusion. This has to be a Hori thing. Later, at his house, Miyamura tells Shindu to close his eyes. The request sends Shindu into an immediate panic. He flails, loudly questioning the safety of his dignity, completely unaware that if anything were to happen, he would be the one making a move. Miyamura ignores the dramatics. He leans in, sniffs Shindo, and steps back with nothing. No scent, no answers. He sighs, shutting Shindu up mid-rant and sits down in defeat. This is full Hori mode. At the sports arena, Miyamura plays table tennis while Watabe and Ishikawa sit nearby. Ishikawa, already used to the absurdities surrounding Miyamura, once again catches Watabe sneaking pictures of him. He points out the obvious: Miyamura has a girlfriend. Watabe remains unbothered. He casually states that liking a girl is cute but means nothing when it comes to admiring Miyamura. He is perfectly content watching from a distance like a full-fledged creep. He also wouldn't mind touching him. Not to mention the special folder on his phone dedicated entirely to Miyamura's pictures and recordings. Before that conversation gets any worse, Miyamura calls Watabe over to join the game. The invitation alone is enough to make Watabe's entire existence feel validated. Miyamura's attention, directed solely at him, becomes the peak of his life's achievements. There is nothing left to live for. Meanwhile, back at home, Hori fumes. The second she catches that scent on Miyamura again, her patience snaps. She moves first to rip his clothes off, then settles for something far more aggressive, grabbing the deodorizer and spraying him like an exorcist purging a demon. She announces that Watabe is too interested in Miyamura, more than the average guy. She is absolutely right, but the fact that she deduced all of this just from his scent makes it terrifying. Then, without warning, Miyamura turns, steps forward, and closes the distance between them. For a split second, Hori thinks he might actually do something rough. Instead, he pulls her into a hug and sniffs her. He doesn't need to figure out everyone else. He is glad that he can still recognize her scent. Hori seems to have gotten mad enough to start crying as she finally thought he would be rough with her, but it didn't happen. The next day, Miyamura walks into school with a bandage on his face. The moment he mentions it being a man-made disaster, his friends immediately know the culprit, Hori. Unlike before, Miyamura seems firmly set on not apologizing this time. Then Hori walks in with a smaller bandage of her own. The sight raises immediate questions. If Miyamura refuses to apologize, does that mean he actually hit her back? But then, would Hori really be angry if Miyamura were capable of getting that rough? The previous day, as Miyamura was getting ready to leave, Hori worked herself up so much during her own rant that she turned around and walked straight into a wall. The slap she had planned for Miyamura had landed, but her own recklessness had left her just as injured. Now Miyamura, having completely forgotten what even started the fight, refuses to apologize. Hori, meanwhile, storms into the student council room, ranting about Miyamura's absolute lack of concern. Ayasaki, watching the meltdown unfold, shrugs it off. Watabe agrees that it doesn't seem like a big deal. Hori, however, refuses to let it go. Sengoku and Sakura step in with a rare moment of reason. If Hori doesn't apologize, she risks pushing Miyamura away with these pointless fights. She reluctantly agrees, but actually doing it is another matter. Her ego refuses to let her back down so easily. The rest of the day turns into a standoff. Miyamura doesn't remember what they're fighting about. Hori, unwilling to apologize, spends every moment ignoring him or shooting death glares in his direction. Then Yasuda, never missing a chance to interfere, hints that Miyamura should check outside. Hori has skipped class, something that never happens. Miyamura finds her outside, arms crossed, frustration brewing. The moment she sees him, she launches into another rant, accusing him of no longer caring about her, hating her, of refusing to acknowledge her feelings. Miyamura barely has time to react before she starts crying. The tears catch him off guard. Seeing her this worked up over something even she probably doesn't fully understand throws him off balance. Instead of comforting her, he does the only thing that makes sense. He starts teasing her for crying. Miyamura barely has time to react before Hori delivers a sharp kick to his gut. The impact doesn't faze him as much as the reason behind it. He was still being nice to her. He brushes it off with a simple statement. He likes her too much to ever truly hate her. This sets her off again. She spirals into another dramatic reaction, overwhelmed by his sweetness while somehow managing to insult him at the same time. Dummy Mura. Then, as if flipping a switch, she shifts into a full lecture. She declares that every fight is always her fault and never his. Miyamura, too exhausted to argue, nods along. From a distance, Ishikawa and Yoshikawa watch in silent horror. They have no context. All they see is Hori kicking Miyamura while he barely reacts. The lack of sound only makes it worse. The next day, Miyamura arrives at school in a hoodie for the first time. His usual clothes are all in a laundry, forcing him into something different. Ishikawa and Yoshikawa, never once to sugarcoat anything, immediately point out that the hoodie doesn't suit him at all. Hori disagrees. Then Yura enters the classroom, also wearing a hoodie, casually asking for a textbook. The moment he sees Miyamura dressed the same way, something inside him lights up. Finally, someone the common style. Yura wastes no time. He forces Miyamura to own the look, shoving sunglasses onto his face, the very same ones they once stole from the student council room. The transformation lasts all of 10 seconds before Hori, burning with rage, kicks Yura out of the classroom. His mistake was standing too close to Miyamura. Elsewhere, Sengoku rushes toward them, panic written all over his face. Yura had spread a rumor that Miyamura was adapting his style permanently. The moment he hears it's only for a day, he breathes a sigh of relief. During the break, Hori reaches over to adjust Miyamura's hood, but something shifts. She suddenly freezes, sniffs it, then narrows her eyes. Miyamura immediately backs away, panic setting in. For the rest of the day, Hori glares at him suspiciously. Miyamura, fully aware that he cannot fool her forever, spends every second fearing his inevitable downfall. The next morning, while walking to school, Hori suddenly pulls Miyamura to the side. Without warning, she grabs his sleeve and sniffs it. Her expression shifts. The scent is familiar. She lights up instantly, and just like that, Miyamura knows the game is over. He finally admits it, but the hoodie isn't even his. It belongs to Shindu. This time, Doggy Hori doesn't get mad. She smiles, satisfied, happily indulging in the fact that her favorite scent is back. With Valentine's Day approaching, everyone shifts their focus to gifts. The pressure builds, and Miyamura is no exception. Unsure about what to do, he turns to Sawada for advice. She doesn't hesitate. Instead of fixating on the gift itself, she tells him that the wrapping matters just as much. Aesthetics are everything. Miyamura, who has never given much thought to packaging, suddenly finds himself reconsidering his entire approach. At school the next day, Remi casually asks Hori if she plans on getting a gift for Miyamura. The answer catches her off guard. Hori has no plans to give Miyamura anything. The reasoning makes sense in the worst possible way. Miyamura's family owns a cake shop. Anything she makes would pale in comparison. The last time she attempted to bake, the result was so disastrous that she lost all confidence in trying again. Remi and Sakura refuse to let her off that easily. They push her to reconsider, arguing that Miyamura isn't expecting perfection. Effort alone will matter to him more than anything else. Later, Sawada finds herself in an unexpected situation. A classmate approaches her, asking for help. She wants to give Yura chocolates for Valentine's Day. Unsure where to start, Sawada turns to Shu, casually asking him what Ero likes. The moment she asks, assumptions explode. His friends immediately jump to conclusions, misreading her intentions entirely. Before the misunderstanding spirals further, she shuts it down without hesitation. Giving chocolates to Shu is absolutely out of the question. Yura, hearing all of this, ends up more confused than anyone. If she wasn't planning on giving chocolates to Shu, why did she ask about his preferences in the first place? Meanwhile, Hori decides to practice. Instead of baking directly for Miyamura, she makes something for her family first. When Sawada finally tastes it, he doesn't hold back. The verdict is brutal. It's not good. Later, Hori meets with Sakura, bringing up the disaster in hopes of getting useful advice. Valentine's Day arrives, and Miyamura, true to form, surprises everyone. Instead of focusing solely on Hori, he brings gifts for all his friends, ensuring that everyone has a good day. Later that evening, Miyamura and Hori finally meet at her apartment. Hori, having prepared for this moment all day, sits with quiet nerves. She has done her best, but uncertainty lingers. No part of her feels confident that Miyamura will actually like what she baked. They settle in, and Miyamura presents a chocolate dessert of his own. The moment Hori sees it, doubt creeps in further. The dessert looks perfect. It smells incredible. When she finally takes a bite, she realizes it tastes just as amazing as it looks. The realization sinks in fast. There is no way her homemade attempt can compete with this. Miyamura, noticing her unease, casually mentions that he was never too worried about the taste of his own dessert. What concerned him more was the wrapping. The comment makes Hori freeze. She forgot to wrap her gift entirely. Pushing through the embarrassment, she finally finds the courage to hand over the chocolate ganache she made. Miyamura doesn't hesitate. Instead of picking at it or politely tasting a small piece, he quickly eats more than half. He doesn't complain. He doesn't hesitate. Hori, watching in disbelief, finally asks if he actually likes it. Miyamura, completely unfazed, reassures her immediately. According to him, it is sweet enough just as it should be. Without missing a beat, he serves some to Hori as well. For him, the entire situation is simple. For Hori, every second leading up to this moment was filled with doubt. Seeing her so anxious over something so small makes Miyamura find the whole thing oddly cute. At the same time, Sawada finds her friend sitting alone in one of the schoolrooms, a box of chocolates resting beside her. She bought them for Yura, but something stopped her. The courage to actually give them to him never arrived. The disappointment on her face is clear. To cheer her up, Sawada steps in, offering a solution only she could come up with. If her friend can't give them to Yura, she should just give them to her instead. But she doesn't stop there. Without hesitation, she hands over a box of chocolates of her own, a quiet yet thoughtful way of showing that she understands how she feels. Kyusuke's first day at school takes an unexpected turn when a girl stops him outside the building. She points out that students aren't allowed to ride bikes and warns him not to park behind the school. This is the first time he sees Yuriko. At that age, she looks exactly like her daughter, Hori. What starts as a simple encounter slowly turns into something more. Yuriko seems interested in him and Kyusuke finds himself drawn to her. But things don't go smoothly. A jealous girl from Kyusuke's class takes issue with Yuriko spending time around him. One day, without warning, she corners Yuriko. The conversation escalates. Words turn sharp, tension thickens, and before long, the girl raises a hand as if to hit her. Yuriko stands firm. Kyusuke arrives just in time to witness everything. His instincts kick in immediately, and he steps forward, ready to defend Yuriko. But before he can do anything, Yuriko speaks. She tells him not to be rude, reminding him that it isn't his place as a man to escalate the situation. Then, without hesitation, she slaps the girl herself, making it clear that she refuses to tolerate bullying. Kyusuke grins as he tells the story. Miyamura, visiting their home, listens as he proudly explains how this moment led to him and Yuriko eventually getting married and having children. Inside the house, Hori's patience runs thin. Sawada, careless as ever, makes a mess and refuses to clean up. Her frustration builds, and when Miyamura and Kyusuke try to step in, it only fuels her anger. Eventually, Sawada gives in and cleans up his mess. Miyamura apologizes and the storm passes. Later, Hori and Miyamura sit down to study. The moment feels peaceful, but not for long. Sawada, now in a much better mood, sees his chance. He tugs at them, pulling them away from their books, determined to get them to play with him instead. After playing for a while, Sawada decides to finish his homework. Miyamura watches him write, impressed that he is already learning kanji in the first grade. Hori, unfazed, dismisses the praise as nothing special. Kyusuke, never one to stay quiet, tries to add his own commentary, but the moment he opens his mouth, Sawada and Hori both shut him down. The smell of cigarettes clings to him, and neither of them wants to hear anything from him until he does something about it. Later that day, Sawada goes to the kitchen for a glass of water. As he reaches for a cup, his eyes land on the pile of unwashed dishes. A memory surfaces, his mother calling him a big help the last time he washed them. The thought lingers. Wanting to contribute again, he rolls up his sleeves and gets to work, determined to be useful without telling anyone. The effort backfires instantly. Hori walks in, sees him at the sink, and shuts it down on the spot. Her voice sharpens as she tells him to never do the dishes again. The words hit harder than she realizes. Sawada stands frozen, completely thrown off. Her reasoning is clear. A knife sits among the dishes. The thought of him carelessly handling it sends a wave of panic through her. Sawada tries to explain, but Hori doesn't give him the chance. She talks over him, making it impossible to argue. His enthusiasm deflates. He only wanted to help, but instead of appreciation, all he gets is rejection. Miyamura, watching from the side, picks up on it immediately. The disappointment on Sawada's face is obvious. Without hesitation, he steps in. He tells Hori that she should have been more considerate, that her younger brother was only trying to do his best for the family. Miyamura tries to ease the situation, turning to Sawada with a calm explanation. Hori isn't angry. She just wants to make sure he stays safe. The attempt completely backfires. Sawada's eyes well up with tears, his disappointment spilling over. Seeing him cry, Hori's own emotions crash down on her. Within seconds, both siblings are in full meltdown mode. What started as a minor disagreement spirals into something far worse. Miyamura stands between them, overwhelmed. He tries to reassure them both, scrambling to find the right words, but nothing works. Desperation kicks in. With no other options, he calls for backup. Kyusuke arrives just in time to witness the disaster. Miyamura, exhausted, immediately asks for help. Kyusuke assesses the situation, takes one long look at the sobbing duo, and decides this is not his problem. Later, after the chaos settles, Miyamura sits with Hori alone. He carefully explains that he wasn't trying to take sides. His only concern was making sure Sawada didn't feel hurt. Hori listens but doesn't react the way he expects. The real problem isn't the argument or the misunderstanding. What bothers her most isn't what he said. It's the fact that in that moment, he wasn't on her side. Out of everything, that's what she cares about the most. And that is it for today. Miyamura survives another day of absolute nonsense. Hori continues to redefine what it means to be a terrifyingly devoted girlfriend, and somehow Wada probably added another picture to his Miyamura shrine. If you enjoyed watching Miyamura get absolutely manhandled by life, drop a like. If you relate to his struggle of just wanting to exist in peace, with the universe saying nah, hit that subscribe button. And if we missed anything, let us know in the comments, unless it's about how many times Hori has committed domestic violence, because at this point we lost count too. Until next time, stay safe, avoid obsessive classmates, and if someone starts sniffing you, run.